Hello and welcome back to the final stretch of Programmatic IO Virtual 2020. Thank you so much, all of you who have attended, for supporting this conference and supporting Ad Exchanger. Excited for this next session. Getting measurement right is pretty much the hardest thing in marketing. The big platforms are getting better at it. Facebook, Snap, Amazon, Google, etc. They all run lift studies for brands, but of course, they're not all working from the same data sets, using the same methodologies, and they're siloed. In this next session, we're going to try to present some nuance and best practices for running incrementality and lift measurement studies. Bringing you this material is going to be two very smart gentlemen. Madan Bharadwaj is the co-founder and CTO at Measured, and Jay Porapatich is the VP of Media at Drizzly, the direct-to-consumer wine and liquor service. So Jay and Madan, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it. Everybody, welcome to our session. Glad to have you here. Happy, what is it, Tuesday, Wednesday? I can't tell anymore. Well, as Zach was introducing the topic, there is a lot of buzz around the words lift measurement, incrementality testing in the industry. A lot of people are talking about it. But if any one of you picked up a lift report from Facebook, one from Hulu, one from Google, and reviewed it, you'd find that each one reports different metrics, presents the analysis differently, the methodology, the approach, the interpretations, they all seem to be different. And marketers are pulling their hair out trying to figure out how to use the lift measurement in their business and for making media buying decisions. My name is Madan. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Measured, and we are an incrementality measurement company. And I have with me my friend Jay. Jay, go ahead.
Jay Porpatic, and I'm over at Drizzly as the VP of Media. And we partnered up with Measured just over a year ago. And I know Madan's going to walk us through some of the complexities of the problems, and then I'll try to make it a little bit tangible for what we've been doing over here at Drizzly.
That's awesome. Okay, with that introduction, let's kick it into high gear. Let me pass it to you, Jay. You are a marketer, and you've been grappling with measurement for a long time. What is the very first question with respect to lift and incrementality that you asked when you were trying to understand the space?
First question generally comes around definitions. Incrementality and lift, they can be used interchangeably quite a bit. And I know, Madan, maybe if you can be the expert here and walk us through kind of the definitions, give us some visuals.
Yeah, absolutely. It turns out I have a slide for that. Let me go here. So imagine you went into your e-commerce platform, Shopify, or your backend CRM, and you pulled, let's say, total number of transactions or conversions for the month of, let's say, May 2020. And that came out to this number. That's what we're calling here total brand conversions, okay? Now, let's say you went for the same time frame, you went into Facebook Ads Manager, pulled out the last touch conversions that Facebook reported, and that's what we're calling here total publisher reported last touch conversions, okay? Now, these are the number of conversions in your overall that were influenced by Facebook. We call it influence conversions. Now, typically what you do is you set up a lift study or an incrementality experiment, and you measure the incremental conversions in this publisher reported conversions. And what this incremental conversion tells you is what your brand would you receive over and above the baseline you would have if you didn't invest in Facebook. And that's what incremental conversions mean, okay? Now, this part here is what's called publisher baseline conversions, right? For example, let's say Facebook reported 100 total last touch conversions, and through incrementality testing, you identified that 40 conversions were incremental, then 60 conversions would be the publisher baseline conversions, okay? Now, with these definitions in place, now let's actually look at the formula for incrementality and lift, right? Now, incrementality is defined as incremental conversions divided by total publisher last touch conversions. This is the incrementality. So in the prior example, if you had 40 conversions over 100 total last touch, incrementality would be 40%, right? Now, lift is defined as incremental conversions divided by publisher baseline conversions, right? So in this case, for the same 40 and 60, the lift would be 66%. Now, this is the primary area of confusion, as Jay was pointing out. You may still be saying, representing the same phenomena, the same quantity, which is the incremental conversions. One person says it's 40%, one person says 66%, and we're constantly going back and forth on who's right and what's wrong about the methodology. It's just a representation of the actual formula as to what is incrementality and what is lift. Now, there's one more metric that's actually more important than these two, at least from our perspective, which is what we call contribution. Now, contribution is incremental conversions divided by total brand conversions, right? So let's say you spend $50,000 in the month of May on Facebook, and you can come back and say, I spent $50,000 on Facebook, it drove 6% of my total business, right? That having to describe the efficacy of media in those terms makes the conversation much more transparent, and it's much more easy and simplified to have a conversation about how much Facebook drove and Google drove and Hulu drove and whatnot, and makes this whole process much more transparent. Let me pause there. How does it land on you?
It does entirely, and this gets us to the percentages. So, ultimately the percent contribution that tells a marketer how good he or she is. To actually move to the next slide and talk about the absolutes, could you just walk us through that map to get us to ultimately the incremental count of new conversions?
That's right. It's a great question. So let's say, for example, let's go back to the Facebook example. Let's say for the month of May, you ran campaigns, you summed up the total reach across all campaigns in your ad account or ad accounts. Let's say that is R here, okay? Let's call that R. Now, when you run incrementality experiments or lift experiments, what you do is you sample a portion of that audience and serve that audience a control treatment, right? And let's call that audience as R hat, that the reach of that audience is R hat, okay? Now, within this campaign audience, you'll end up with conversions. Some people converted, and let's call that C. And within this audience, the control audience, some people converted, let's call that C hat. Having set this baseline, now conversion rate for the campaign is defined as C divided by R. Now, key point here to note is that I'm using reach to define conversion rate. I'm not using impressions, I'm not using clicks, I'm using reach, which is an important definition that's necessary for incrementality calculations. Similarly, conversion rate for control is C hat by R hat. Now, a new definition here called baseline conversions. Now, baseline conversions is defined as reach times the conversion rate of the control, right? That's what's baseline. Now, incremental conversions is this conversion minus baseline conversion. So what we're doing is we are decomposing the last touch conversions we observed on Facebook into a baseline piece and an incremental piece. Now, these are the fundamental formulas in the space, right? If you understand these formulas, for the most part, you've had the 101 on incrementality.
On the next slide, Madan, if you kind of walk through the scenario that a lot of publishers actually give us the reports, and marketers are used to last click or multi-touch attribution had kind of its day as well. But when we look at the publisher reports, kind of give us a sense of the confusion and points of concern that we might want to double click on.
Yeah, this is common, and we've spent a lot of time. I've lost a bunch of head and some grace along the way trying to understand this myself. But this is our learnings across many years of working in this space. Number one, we talked about this, lift and incrementality. Don't use them interchangeably. They're actually two different quantities. Our recommendation would be to use incrementality and contribution. Lift is actually not as useful. Incrementality and contribution are much more valuable quantities to measure and talk about, okay? Second, this is something for you guys to think about as marketers. Publishers don't always put out all the metrics behind an experiment or a test, okay? Sometimes you end up getting a curated set of metrics, and it might be pretty hard to understand actual reads behind it and actually ask all the questions behind it. These are the four quantities or metrics you really need to get for any test. Reach control, conversions, control. You have these four, you can calculate everything else behind the test. So make sure that whenever you see a lift report from any one of your publishers, especially in a managed services context, you ask for those four metrics across all dimensions, okay? We talked about conversion rate against reach as opposed to impressions and clicks. Another one, which is kind of aggregating. We're all used to pivot tables. Of course, I love pivot tables myself as well, but you can pivot reach, right? Of course, when you pivot reach, you duplicate the reach counts, and that obviously throws all the calculations into a loop. So no pivot tables when it comes to calculating incrementality and lift. And finally, this is something a little bit more advanced, but almost all publishers have two systems. One, a performance reporting system like Ads Manager, and separately a lift reporting system like Facebook has, lift console, right? The metrics may not actually always align perfectly between these two. If you go look at the total number of last touch conversions in Ads Manager compared to your lift reports, they may not be 100%. Now, the discrepancy, depending on which platform you're looking at, may be a lot, maybe a little, and it may be confusing whether those reads are actually, reasonable and the discrepancies are okay. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And so we have a rule of thumb here. The rule of thumb is 10%. If the discrepancies are under 10%, for the most part, you can use the reads you're getting and move on with it. If they're over 10%, sometimes you see 30, 40, 50% discrepancies between basic numbers, conversion counts, reach counts, impression counts, that kind of stuff. Then what you do is use it with a pinch of salt, as I say. Maybe take the same reads, marry it with some other analytics that you have from GA or some other study you've done, and then use them in conjunction with another study as opposed to by itself. Let me pause. Any of these sort of look familiar to you, Jay?
Entirely. Yeah, no, they're very interchangeable, but ultimately probably potentially give you two different outcomes.
That's right. That's right. So Jay, let me flip the script a little bit here. Now, you are the practitioner. I'm the technologist. You've worked together on Drizzly. But what are the takeaways here? You've worked on incrementality, especially in applying incrementality measurement to media buying at Drizzly. Walk us through your experience. What was the process like? And I have a slide here to support that, but give us your experience.
Yeah, we Drizzly engaged with Measured really about 12 months ago. So it kind of lines up well here to talk about what we've seen to date and then what we might see over the next course of the 6 months or so. We started pretty focused. I mean, Drizzly is a two-sided alcohol marketplace. We help, alcohol show up to a front door in less than 60 minutes from a local, retailer if you want that Cabernet or that bottle of bourbon. It was fascinating to come to Drizzly when I started and realize that we were spending about 1% of our budget on Facebook with, and I'm only looking back 16 months ago. So while a lot of advertisers are trying to wean themselves off of Facebook, it became very apparent that Facebook was a channel we had to figure out. And Facebook has, a very mature ad product. They have a split A/B testing tool that allows us to assign ultimately a PSA or, a public service announcement that we can understand a control group over time and make sure that working with Measured, we keep that a balanced group that's treated with a similar frequency as our test group and eliminates a lot of the biases. Our Facebook experience really kind of encapsulated our first 6 months with Measured. We realized that we had to get this right. We felt confident with our incrementality ultimately, because we're able to assign a control audience and measure that over time. We can understand the incrementality at a campaign level, an audience level, and potentially a creative level. So we felt that Facebook was our biggest priority, and we actually scaled it probably too large. We're north of 50% of our media budget. And going into 2021, we'll probably start to wean ourselves off. Months 7 through 12 with Measured, ultimately we're kind of setting the stage to get us in a much more diversified point of view with clear sort of focus on incrementality. So in the case of streaming TV, we approached a sort of OTT device maker, and they were very much open to an incrementality study with the PSA. There's certainly a cost consideration there. In order to serve up those PSA ads, you certainly start to accrue media. But we were able to use an upper funnel media like streaming TV and actually start to diversify our media mix and make sure that we had unit economics to kind of met our business model. But we felt really good about that. As we started to expand into additional social platforms, social too, that's kind of represented in here. This is less of a plus sign where it's a marketing win, if you will. We would treat this as a measurement win. So it was a negative. We actually ran a lift study that was sort of post-campaign analysis. We weren't able to get in-market results. And we tried a second one with this particular social platform that was so important for the alcohol beverage category. But in fact, we were 0 for 2. So we essentially cut cords. We know we're going to have some winners and some losers. In the case of Social 3, when we approached this additional platform, we were able to actually get access to a test and control log file. And we felt that that was a huge win, and pushing that, negotiating for that is actually pretty important. And then in the case of podcasting, a channel where we worked with a third party, an outside party that was able to fire a pixel and essentially establish on every single podcast download a test and control audience and serve up distinct ads to a test group. So that again gave us an incrementality read with a certain degree of cost. The next 6 months, there's going to be a series of what I'll call validations. Incrementality testing is the gold standard. I would agree with Madan, but lift studies allow you to do a post-campaign analysis. Match market has been sort of the tried and true result for marketers for a long time. We actually use Pulse as well as baseline sort of regression models. We're starting to expand into linear TV. And in that instance, we can't actually assign a control audience in the most simple, straightforward way. So those are the ways we've kind of approached it over the last, let's call it 12 plus months.
Phenomenal, the amount of ground you've covered in just 12 months. Great to see that. Now, having done this, Jay, what are the takeaways for you? How would you advise marketers out there? What are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that you'd say, hey, these are the learnings for you?
Yeah, we threw these into 3 distinct buckets that we feel are common challenges, especially for at least Drizzly, and I think they would apply largely across the board. There's been a pretty significant shift towards incrementality, and I think actually negotiating with these media partners and getting access to a test control file, we're in a much better place today than we probably ever have been with sort of this resurgence of A/B testing as walled gardens have come in, as multi-touch attribution has struggled with sort of a unique identifier. Everyone is realizing within their sort of siloed data sets that Zach explained, you've got to figure out a means for this. So if you approach a media partner and probably limit your sheer number of media partners, we're very measurement first. We don't look to see where our consumers are consuming every possible media channel. It's a really different world than cable broadcast TV. We can't chase every media partner. We've got to figure out those that are willing to play ball. And then that value exchange. We've been able to work with some, whether it's the contract terms or them actually looking for PR around their particular media area. We're willing to celebrate those wins alongside them. We act as sort of a conduit of data to a lot of CPG companies. So co-op advertising is a big hook for them as well. So if we can kind of figure out where they can benefit, we certainly could probably have a greater likelihood to get access to those test control files that are so important to us. When we do the planning sort of approach and think about all the different stages, there's the idea of doing a validation after a test or actually making media decisions in market. At Drizzly, we're focused primarily on the latter, but then we might use a validation at a later date to, in fact, check our homework and use, a Nielsen or some other third party to understand in a panel environment, does that match up to our incrementality percentage? We're always mindful of PSAs. I will say that even in the case of streaming TV, our PSA costs probably got out of control. We were able to rein that in over time, but certainly every dollar's got to be considered at a high rate. And then ultimately, the idea of rolling this out is much more difficult than people probably anticipate, at least myself. We've got to align to our leadership, consider what our sort of forecasts we have inside our business model. And really, in the case of Drizzly, we had to wean ourselves off of 6 years as a last click advertiser. So we were very accustomed to looking at that data. When we think about media decisioning, we're kind of focused first and foremost on what's that required latency to get confident data, not only so we can make optimizations, but ultimately how can we reconcile our reporting to go back to our leadership team and tell them how effective paid media was at the close of a given month. And then ultimately is being really honest and upfront about the learning agenda. A lot of times testing can be just put into market to say how good was marketing, and that's not the question we're typically asking. We're asking, in fact, what was good and what was bad. And we inevitably know there's going to be a mix. So that's kind of the way that we've approached that to date. And we're open to imperfect data and iterating over time, which is pretty key. Okay,
I see a couple of, is that questions? Okay, 1 minute. Let's throw the floor open for questions. Any questions from the audience?
That was wonderful. Thank you guys. So what, Jay, or for both of you, in terms of like deciding what percentage of budget you need to allocate to studies, or how frequently you need to repeat studies, any guidance you can offer there in terms of having a program in place?
I'll take a first swing, Jay. Maybe you can plus that. So from a PSA cost perspective, I think we're able to set up the experiments to roughly about the 1 to 1.5% of total budget. But you don't have to run PSAs all the time. There's only a few channels that require PSAs. And a lot of channels you can do what's called a holdout, an actual classic holdout, where you hold out the audience and observe the audience as opposed to actually having to serve them a PSA. So certain channels require a PSA, 1 to 1.5%. A lot of other channels don't require a PSA. You can do a holdout or a counterfactual analysis to make up for not having a PSA. So let me pause right there, Jay. Would you agree?
I would agree. The only thing I will say on the media execution, on the Drizzly side, we do all of our media buying in-house. So we basically think of like a PSA wanting to be that synced up. What's our buying strategy? So in fact, if we're changing our buy on a weekly basis and it's material enough to see an impact on incrementality, it justifies sort of an always-on approach on a PSA cost. If you're gonna, go in a managed service environment or set a CTV program up and after 3 months look at it, that might be an instance where a post-campaign analysis is suffice.
All right, great. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. We're going to leave it there. But anyone who has a question they'd like to get answered, please reach out to Jay and to Madan. Guys, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, stay